do you stand on all of this? Because it has drawn some debate. Some saying, look, he's earned the right again to continue in his role because perhaps we're seeing a little bit more progress from England. But then there are some saying maybe it's time to move on. Maybe it's time to bring in somebody else that can take England to the next level, which is to actually win one of these competitions that we've got close to.
Well, I would say it's important that the players want you to be there.
Yeah.
And it's also important the FA want you to stay. They're the two most important. Then you can add in the fans as well. And I think the majority of them think that Gareth should still be. And that's not 100% obviously, but I think probably given that most people would still say yes, the opportunity. Do you know what I'd love Gareth to do? Is come out and go, I'm going to do to the Euros and I'm only going to stay if we win it. I'll think of the future after that, but I'm going there only solely to try and win the tournament. If I don't achieve that, I'm retiring. I'm calling it a day. I'm going to the Euro. I'd love him to really have a bold approach and go, I want to manage to the Euros. I want to take a team. I'm going to try and win it. Because one thing that stands out about way England have lost is that there's no chaotic matches. Sometimes you need to win. You need chaotic scenarios where you make really big and bold decisions at times where it just becomes crazy. England they're quite a pragmatic team in the way they play. And I think sometimes I've seen World Cup teams who have won tournaments who have just literally from nowhere have come out with this brand of football and suddenly changed as the tournament's gone along as well.
In a sort of way, when you look back to the World Cup, the only game I can think of that was sort of similar to that, it wasn't chaotic because it was dominant. It was the Iran game.
Yeah.
But when he made those substitutions, they were bold, they were exciting, and they were all, the players that came on all had another part to play in the goals that were scored. So, yeah, we've talked about it at length, and everyone can sit here and we can all be a manager, can't we? We can all have our opinions of how we thought a game should have gone, perhaps, and we talked about maybe he wasn't proactive, he was more reactive with some of his calls. But
proactive now on that is come out of a really bold approch and say, I'm going there to the Euros and I want to go there and we're going to go there to win it. Not all this we'll see how we do or thinking. To me, it needs a real directive of this team is well good enough to compete with the very best teams in world football, in my opinion, watching England. The X factor is actually doing things that might be unpopular as well. Like Didier Deschamps, who's now going into his next World Cup, has done some really crazy decisions along the way, left out certain people and then brought others back in. He's made decisions that he really believes. He's changed Griezmann's role in the setup of the French team. He brought in Giroud, wouldn't have been actually very close to the starting lineup for France at all going into this World Cup if Benzema would have made it. And I think he needs to have that bold approach and the emphasis must be on solely to win it, okay? And then if I don't win it, I'm walking away. Because he doesn't want to be known as the nearly man does he?
What manager goes into a tournament not wanting to win it? Do you know what I
mean?
No,
it's a different... Imagine if you're saying it. Saying, look, I'm going there.
So you mean as in if you just declare it to everybody, this
just
is what
come
the
clean
aim
and
is.
go, we're going there, I'm going to try and win it. If I don't win it, I'm walking away. And that's it. And I think there's a lot more certainty. There'll be no press conferences during the tournament. There'll be none in the build-up. Everything that you're trying to achieve, there's going to be no questions because you already made the statement. No one can go to you, well, you know what I'm going to do. If I don't win it, I'm going. I'd love Gareth to have that approach. And it might force him to do some of the things that he's being questioned for.
You were saying about England have been maybe more pragmatic under Southgate. But have you seen any sort of progression at all? Were there any moments in any of these games in Qatar that you thought, actually, there's a little bit of difference here? They have learned from the Euros. They have learned from the World Cup before. Well,
I think England are a better team than they were in in Russia in 2018. I think they're clearly a better team now. And I think likewise with the Euros. I think they've improved. But they only got them to the quarterfinals this time because they met up against France. And France, whatever they can do, sometimes it can be the word chaotic with France. And then suddenly they win from a situation they look like they could have been on the wrong end of the result. And people will use the penalty example of Kane scoring. It's easy to say hypothetically, if Kane scores that, England win it. Well, there's no guarantee they would have won it. No. Who would you have said would have been more braver in his approach? Deschamps or Gareth Southgate if it had gone 2-2? Who would you have thought? Because I would have gone Deschamps, without doubt.
Yeah, unfortunately, in that sense, you're probably right. But that's probably because of what we've seen before with England. You know, when we get ourselves into those situations where we think we're a good place, we sort of revert back to being defensive rather than let's go again, let's go for a third, let's whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
is it a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that the way they lost to Croatia, the way that they were beaten by Italy in the Euros, and the way they went out in this World Cup? You could make a case. Is that a coincidence, or is it quite obvious because the bold approach to trying to win a game? I watched that Croatia game about 3 times now, and the one they lost in 2018. Yeah. That game was so one-sided in the first half that the moment they made changes, England went on the back foot and ended up they changed their wide areas, and it allowed them to get at England.
Okay, very quickly then, because we do have to hit a break. From what you're saying then, why should Southgate continue in his role then? Because by the sound of it, he's not necessarily learnt from what he's done wrong before. I
think he's learnt a lot, but I think the one thing that stands out for me is just make statements about your intentions and the way you're going to play going into Euros. Because a lot of teams, international football, would look at England and think they're a scary side. Yeah. We'll go with that approach, that we're going to scare the life out of teams. Because England are capable of doing that.
Yeah, well, you only had to look at the bench as well against France. I think some of the French players would have looked at England's bench and thought, game changers on that bench. It sadly didn't work in England's favour in the end. But yeah, we're still waiting to hear from Gareth Southgate as to what he will decide with his future. He does have a contract that does take him through until the end of 2024, so that will take him through to the Euros should England qualify. But he has said he wants to take time away to think about it all.
Do you know, take the pressure off now? If you make a statement and your intentions, and then you know the outcome.
Well, not only does it take the pressure off, it also gives your players confidence that my manager has just said, this is it. Yeah. It's our time to win. And it might sound really obvious to a lot of people, but actually, it just psychologically, that gives you a bit more of a sort of swing in your step, doesn't it, really?
Every squad player would be going to a tournament knowing their only objective is to win it. And they might say, well, that was that going to this World Cup. Well, it clearly wasn't. It wasn't quite that. I feel they always distance themselves from being successful. And I think I learnt that. I wasn't very successful as a player. I'd done all right. But the long and short of it now, I've played with a lot of players who have been very successful, and there is a difference.